Hi there. So as you can probably guess, SQL code can get pretty messy. Well, we've only focused on simple queries so far. Most queries are multiple and often many lines long. Sometimes it can be difficult for you or someone else looking at your code to understand what's going on in the design of the query. So in this video, we're going to talk about adding comments to our SQL code in order to help shed light on what we're trying to do with our code. Adding comments is important not only because it makes your queries easy to understand, both for you and for others, it's also going to help with troubleshooting your code and making your code easier to share overall. After this lesson, you should be able to discuss the importance of writing comments as a part of your code, describe several comment syntaxes that can be used in SQL, and of course, actually write comments in your code. Let's begin. If you've written in any other programming language, you know that comments are helpful when you've written some code and you've gone away from it for a while and when you come back to work on it again. You want to understand what you were doing. The same thing applies here. You may write some code to retrieve some data, go back, work on it for a while, and then decide to come back and modify your query for the data you want to retrieve. Just adding a few helpful comments here and there is just going to make it far easier to understand what you were doing and why you were doing it. But you can also use the comments to mute the expression of some code, frequently referred to as commenting out code. This technique helps you troubleshoot some of the issues you have with your query a little bit better. You can effectively get rid of parts of your query without actually getting rid of the statements themselves, and then bring them back in one by one to see where your query goes awry. So there are two ways to add comments. One is by adding single line comments, and the other is by adding a section of comments. In this, I'm selecting shoe ID, brand ID, my shoe name from shoes, and I just want to comment out the brand ID. I don't need it here. So I'm going to add 2 dashes, and it's just going to remove that whole line. When I run this code block, that's what's going to happen is I'm just going to get the return for the shoe ID and the shoe name. In the next example that I've done is comment out a section of the code. As you can see, to do this, I've used a combination of a backslash and an asterisk. What this is effectively saying is don't run anything between the 2 backslashes and the asterisk. This you can use for a large portion of queries, and it becomes really helpful when you want to just narrow down the one individual line that you want to run. Use these before your select statement to denote what you're doing. Also use these to cross out portions of what you're doing and to troubleshoot different aspects of your code. At the same time, as helpful as comments are, you can definitely have comments go wrong. So it's important to understand how adding comments in the right way can be helpful to you in understanding your code, but sometimes comments can be overly done and can definitely confuse you. I think it's good to realize keeping your code organized, keeping it in a really standard format is just going to make it a lot easier to read. And then add comments where it doesn't follow the normal flow or syntax, or just little points that you may want to read or note for later. Here are a couple examples where there are too many comments and comments gone wrong. And this is another example where the code is just much more simple, easy to read, and you can definitely follow what's happening by looking at it and following the logical pattern through reading each one. But you can also, at the same time, see where comments are placed really elegantly at just the right place to help you understand what's going on. Now, one last point that isn't really part of comments discussion, but something you may find helpful in general, is using a source code or text editor. A lot of times, the relational database management system you're using will have somewhere to input your queries, but sometimes just writing them outside in a source code editor so that you can modify them and save them is really helpful. One I use all the time and always recommend is Notepad++. It might be something you're interested in downloading and using to start writing your queries. It can also help a lot with automatically color highlighting your different statements and can help you with some of the indentation to make sure you're writing your code and it's nice and clean. Okay, that wraps it up for our discussion on comments. Now you should be able to start writing comments in your SQL code to help yourself and others understand your design intentions. I heartily recommend you get in the habit of commenting in all your coding now, as you're just beginning with SQL. So it's something that becomes second nature to you as you work on more complex queries going forward.